You, though, big picture. You have now been in your position for 3 years, and let's talk about what's happened during those 3 years. More migrants have crossed the border illegally last year than ever before. The asylum cases backlog has more than tripled since 2019. You yourself have said that more than 85% of migrants caught crossing the border illegally are being released into the U.S. as they await their court dates. Let's just put impeachment aside for a minute. Why do you deserve to keep your job, Mr. Secretary?
Kristen, the data that you cite is a powerful example of why we need legislation to fix what everyone agrees is a broken immigration system. And you take a snapshot of the data over the past 3 years. Let's take a look before the last 3 years. That case backlog, which is about 3 million cases, has been growing year over year over year. The time between when we encounter an individual at the border and the time of final adjudication of an asylum case has been years, 5 to 7 years, 4 years and years. I remember when I entered the Department of Homeland Security in 2009, we were wrestling with these very same issues. The system has not been fixed for 30 years. A bipartisan group of senators have now presented us with the tools and resources we need, bipartisan group, and yet Congress killed it before even reading it.
No doubt there is gridlock on Congress, but do you bear responsibility for what is happening at the border, what the president himself has called a crisis?
It certainly is a crisis, and we don't bear responsibility for a broken system, and we're doing a tremendous amount within that broken system. But fundamentally, Congress is the only one who can fix it.
That is something that you terminated. Do you regret terminating it, given that migration has increased in the wake of that? And are you considering reinstating it, working with Mexico to do that?
A few things about Remain in Mexico. First of all, it depends upon Mexico's agreement. And Mexico has articulated publicly that it will not allow the re-implementation of Remain in Mexico, number one. Number two, it's been challenged in the courts. And number three, remember something, that Remain in Mexico was implemented in January of 2019. Yeah. In 2019, there was almost a 100% increase in the number of encounters at our southwest border over 2018.
What about reinstituting the Remain in Mexico policy?
The National Border Patrol Council, which is the union for Border Patrol agents, which is a very conservative group, they support this legislation. I want you to take a listen to the head of that union, Brandon Judd.
I'm going to look at this. Is this bill better than the status quo? And it absolutely is. Nobody can argue that. Nobody can argue that it's not better than what we currently have. Although it's not perfect, it is a step in the right direction. And I would rather have the step in the right direction than nothing.
Now, I know you know Brandon Judd, but for viewers, this is the head of a union that endorsed Trump strongly in 2020, consistently criticized President Biden. Go check out their Twitter feed. They mock him all the time. They say this is better than nothing. It should become law. Are you saying that the Border Patrol Union is wrong?
Yes. If that's what they still believe, they're wrong. It's not better than nothing. Look, there are some things in that bill that we should do. You know, change the asylum standard and the like. Here's what else the bill did. You know, the bill basically creates an asylum corps. Okay, it creates a bunch of, thousands of bureaucrats, basically agents, asylum agents, that would be empowered right at the border to either allow people into the country with an immediate work permit. Today they got to wait 6 months. You give them an immediate work permit, you're going to have more people coming. That's a huge magnet. Or they have the power to immediately release them and grant them asylum, which now puts them on a 5-year path to citizenship, which is what a lot of Democrats want. They want to turn a bunch of illegal immigrants into citizens, into voters, in the hopes that those people will then turn around and vote for them in future elections, grateful because they'll know who let them in. That's a huge problem. That doesn't solve the border. It makes it worse.
This doesn't provide a path to citizenship for any of these people, just to clarify. But it raises...
Yes, it does. Absolutely it does. No, yes, it does. When you have asylum, you are on a path to citizenship. An asylum, when you get asylum, you are a year away from a green card and 4 years away from citizenship. Absolutely it does.
But you said you approved of the asylum
have the power to grant you asylum, not even a judge, a bureaucrat.
But the judges, as you know, are not judges per se. They're immigration judges. It's a different kind of judge. It's basically an immigration attorney who's empowered to be an immigration judge. You know that. But you said that you liked the changes to asylum. I mean, they raised the standard for asylum. The people who support this bill say it is much needed. Senator Langford calls it by far the most conservative border security bill in 4 decades. That includes, of course, the 2013 compromise that you negotiated as part of the Gang of Eight. This bill would have allowed the administration to temporarily shut down the border. It included funding for the border wall. It would have made it much more difficult to claim asylum. It added detention beds. It added ICE agents. It added deportation flights and asylum officers. And it has none of the Democratic priorities that were included in your 2013 compromise, such as a path to citizenship. Why isn't that a win for Republicans?
Well, first of all, you went through a list of long things that I don't agree with. First of all, it doesn't shut down the border. It creates the ability to shut down the border, but it also gives the president the ability to say, we're not going to do it. The emergency is suspended because it's not in our national interest to do this. By the way, you still have to process, I believe, 1,400 illegal immigrants a day, even in one of these emergencies, and it goes away in 3 years. The other thing it does is it doesn't touch the parole program, which is one of the loopholes the president has used to release all these people into this country. He's paroling them in. That's not even asylum. You talk about the asylum, about the judges, the immigration judges. Here's the difference. Those judges, their decision can be overruled by the attorney general. The attorney general could actually step in and overrule them. These asylum officers this asylum corps they're going to create, they can't even be overturned by the attorney general. These people would have the power right at the border to grant people asylum. And a lot of people don't talk about that, but it's right there in the law. It does that. As far as the standard of, yeah, it's good to change the standard, but it's going to be applied. And it ultimately is going to be applied by an administration that has proven its unwillingness to enforce our immigration laws.
fact, our NBC News poll found that 76% of voters are concerned about whether the president has the necessary mental and physical health to be president for a second term. What is the plan to convince voters otherwise?
Well, let's just say two things. This election is going to be about two men, but really two different visions for the country. President Trump just the other night confused what day of the week it was. He has confused who the leader of North Korea and China are. He's confused the leaders of Hungary and Turkey. By the way, Speaker Mike Johnson was on the other day, and he confused Iraq and Iran. And, of course, President Trump doesn't know the difference between Nancy Pelosi and Nikki Haley. And, oh, by the way, last night President Trump saw fit to basically dump on Nikki Haley's husband, who is serving in the military right now because he hasn't around. That's what he continues to do. So the people of America are going to have to make a choice. Are they for a guy like Joe Biden, who wakes up every day thinking about the people of America, thinking about how to lift people up? Or are they going to be for Donald Trump, who has already said, and you can believe him when he says this, even though when his lips are moving, he's usually lying, that he is going to be engaged in revenge and taking us backwards? I think the choice is clear. You know what Joe Biden remembers? He remembers how to build 46,000 infrastructure projects. He remembers how to build one of the strongest economies in the world. He remembers how to make sure that the unemployment rate stays as low as it has for 50 years and to create 800,000 jobs. And that is why, let me just finish, that is why the president says, watch me. And the president has demonstrated an incredible amount of accomplishment in a few short years that outpace anything that Donald Trump has ever done, including creating 15 million jobs.
People are watching him, and again, 76% of them have those concerns, and so do some of his donors. This is what the Washington Post is saying. Quote, top Biden donors were fielding calls and text messages from anxious Democrats, asking if other Democrats still had time to jump into the presidential race. When is Gavin getting in? Or how about Whitmer or Shapiro buzzed around Democratic circles over the last 24 hours? How do you respond to Democrats who say they want to see a change at the top of the ticket?
I'm in the process of doing it right now and demonstrating that the president's accomplishment have really been second to none. And Joe Biden's going to get up every day. The one thing Joe Biden is never going to do is count on this. He is never, ever going to quit, because that's not what he's done his entire life, notwithstanding the fact that, by the way, he lost another child early in his life, and he got up and he went to work. And then he had difficulty with his other son, and he got up and he went to work, and he's going to keep doing that as we move the country forward.
How that could possibly happen, how anyone could be that irresponsible. And I thought, what data was in there that may compromise sources and methods? By that I mean names of people who helped, or et cetera. And it's just totally irresponsible.
Was President Biden's handling of classified documents also totally irresponsible, given that they were found, for example, in his garage?
Kirsten, one of the reasons why there was a special counsel appointed was to gauge that very thing. You will also remember that Vice President Pence went through the same examination, and the conclusion was the same as it relates to Vice President Pence and then Vice President Biden. The special counsel concluded that the law and the facts and the evidence suggested that they could not bring any criminal prosecution against President Biden. That is juxtaposed to the 91 felony counts in nature, in tone, and in content. They're not even close to being the same cases. But that's not what the most egregious thing is about this report. It is this ad hominem attack that questioned the president's capacity. And I want to speak to that very clearly, because I can testify, because I've been working very closely with this president for the past 2 years. I've been knowing him for 30 years. I have met with him personally. I have met with him with 2 people, 5 people, 10 people. I have been on trips with him, crisscrossing the country, rebuilding America based on this incredible infrastructure bill that was passed. And I'm telling you, this guy's tough. He's smart. He's on his game. And as Secretary Mayorkas said a minute ago, when you go in to brief the president, you better have your big boy pants on. And this kind of sense that he's not ready for this job is just a bucket of BS that's so deep, your boots will get stuck in it.
And I hear similar things from people who spent a lot of time with Biden recently, just like you said. And by the way, we're going to hear from Bibi Netanyahu later in the show. And he's had interactions, and you'll see what he says. But let's look at what happened when he came out. Public perception is what's important here in a campaign. Let's take a look at what happened when he came out Thursday night to defend himself on this and to insist that his memory is just fine and he's fit. But look at what happened.
As you know, initially, the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in.
I mean, he's holding a press conference to push back against this notion that his memory's gone, and he's confusing the president of Egypt with the president.
Right. Jonathan, you've been
Mexico.
at this a long time. As you well know, small gaffes are a part of what all of us in public life do. Speaker Johnson of the House just confused Iran and Israel. He said, we are beginning to send aid to Iran. Donald Trump confused Nancy Pelosi and Nikki Haley. Here's what matters, not the occasional small gaffe. He had a 12-minute press conference where he was focused, engaged, purposeful, and all you're focused on is that 1 minute at the end. That's not what distinguishes him from his opponent.
That's not exactly fair. And I will concede there are many moments, and we have, Lord knows, talked about them, where Donald Trump seems wildly confused about a lot of things. But
untruthful and alarming in the things he said.
And we've focused on all of that. But this was not just one moment in the 12-minute press conference. I mean, take a look at what we saw just recently, a handful of other events. Take a look, a few more.
There's been a response from there's been a response from the opposition, but yes, I'm sorry, from Hamas. I said, America's back. And Mitterrand from from France looked at me.
I mean, you know, Mitterrand, whether he's from Germany or France, obviously he's from France, but he's been dead for 25 years. I mean, there are a number of these incidents, and they may be gaffes. We all make mistakes. We all make mistakes, but this is what the American public is seeing, and it's raised concerns. Our poll shows over 80% responding, saying that they think that Biden is too old to serve as president again.
And Jonathan, if press coverage focuses relentlessly on things that don't represent Joe Biden's real body of work, you can push towards that kind of result. That poll should have been about who's actually working to secure our border. Joe Biden, who's worked across the aisle for months with a bipartisan group in the Senate, or Donald Trump, who is willfully killing the bipartisan border deal in the Senate, not because he wants to secure America, but to secure his own reelection. What that poll could have been about is who understands that our alliances keep us safer. Joe Biden, who's led 50 countries to come to the defense of Ukraine, or Donald Trump, who alarmingly last night bragged about a story where he claims he threatened a NATO ally to throw them to the Russian wolves if they didn't pay up. NATO isn't a protection racket, but it is a security alliance. So the substance, the difference, Joe Biden and Donald Trump and most elected officials make small gaffes just like the ones you just showed. That's not what matters. We are in a fight for the soul of our nation, and the idea that somehow Joe Biden forgot the date of his son's death is offensive and appalling. And what you should be focused on, in my view, what that poll should have focused on, what our nation should focus on,
can I stop
is
you
the
for a
ways
second,
that
though, because
Donald Trump is undermining rule of law, democracy, and our safety as a nation.
Look, as you said, they found evidence that he willfully retained national security information, and even probably beyond a reasonable doubt. But the Justice Manual says that that's not enough. Even if you can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, you have to believe as the prosecutor that you can get a conviction from a jury. So why that information was included was because he's explaining to the Attorney General in that report why he believes a jury would not convict Joe Biden, even if they could probably prove it beyond a reasonable doubt.
But how does him allegedly not knowing the year his son died, how is that relevant?
Because the mental state that's required. It has to be willful, right? So they found evidence that he knew there were classified documents in his basement, for instance. But if he can tell a jury, like, yeah, I guess I knew that day, but then I forgot the next day, well, then he didn't willfully retain the classified documents.
Sarah?
Look, as you
17, in which he criticized James Comey's infamous press conference, in which he criticized Hillary Clinton's handling of classified emails, even as he declined to prosecute her. A similar circumstance, although he wasn't a special counsel, quote, derogatory information, this is you writing, derogatory information sometimes is disclosed in the course of criminal investigations and prosecutions, but we never release it gratuitously. The FBI director laid out his version of the facts for the news media as if it were a closing argument, but without a trial. It is a textbook example of what federal prosecutors and agents are taught not to do, unquote. By going to the lengths he did to critique Biden's age and memory, even as he was clearing him of a crime, how do you differentiate between what Robert Hur did that you say is okay from what James Comey did that you say is not?
Well, Jake, there's several significant differences between those two examples. One is, most fundamentally, that Jim Comey wasn't the prosecutor. He was the head of the FBI. His job was to ensure the police collected the proper evidence, submitted it to the prosecutors, and ultimately it's up to the prosecutors in the Justice Department and the Attorney General to make a decision about what information is released. Rob Hur was the prosecutor. It was his job to make that decision and make that recommendation to the Attorney General, who, as you acknowledged, has previously committed to make this report public. That's one difference. The second difference is the special counsel regulation. In the ordinary case, Hillary Clinton was not investigated by a special counsel. There was no procedure to make those reasons public. Here, it's baked into this regulation. Now we sit, Jake, 25 years down the road. That regulation was passed by Attorney General Reno in 1999. Now we have 25 years of experience. I think it's worthwhile to sit back and ask whether or not this is the right procedure. Do we really think that we ought to have prosecutors writing reports for public release of everything they discover and all their reasons for not prosecuting, or is there a better way to do that without having all the embarrassing information come to public light?
The relatives of the hostages have written a letter to your cabinet saying, quote, the family's request to immediately meet with the members of the cabinet and hear if it is still committed to the release of the abductees or whether the power to run negotiations should be transferred to a party that sees itself as committed to saving their lives. So let me understand your priorities. What is the higher priority at this moment? Totally eliminating Hamas or saving the lives of those hostages and getting them freed?
They're not mutually exclusive. The reason we succeeded in getting 110 hostages out, that's half the hostages, is because we applied military pressure, not because we stopped applying it, but because we applied it. Look, I think the families of the hostages are in a terrible bind. I mean, it just tears your heart out to listen to them and to think about what their relatives are going through. I'm committed to getting them out. We'll make every effort. It requires pressure, and pressure has worked, and pressure will work again.
How many of the 132 hostages do you think are still alive?
I think enough to warrant the kind of efforts that we're doing, and we're going to try to do our best to get all those who are alive back, and frankly also the bodies of the dead. But I won't go into that right now. I'm not sure that anybody can put themselves in the position of the families, but neither can the families put themselves in the position of the decision makers. These are two separate things. They reach our heart, they reach my heart, but I'm also responsible for the safety and the security of the people of Israel, and to make sure that these terrorist outrages and these kidnappings do not happen again.
Military force, but how do you kill the idea of a resistance as long as there is occupation? At the end of this process, after this is done, after you've eliminated the military threat, doesn't there need to be a Palestinian state?
Everybody who talks about a two-state solution, well, I ask, what do you mean by that? Should the Palestinians have an army? Should they have, can they sign a military pact with Iran? Can they import rockets from North Korea and other deadly weapons? Should they continue to educate their children for terrorism and annihilation? Of course, you'd say, of course not. And the substance, I've always said, in a future peace agreement, which everybody agrees is far off, I think the Palestinians should have the powers to govern themselves, but none of the powers to threaten Israel. And the most important power that has to remain in Israel's hands is overriding security control in the area west of the Jordan. That includes Gaza. Otherwise, history has shown terrorism comes back, and we don't want terrorism to come back.
Well, you can kill them as a military force, but how do you kill the idea of not in until Hamas is completely eliminated? How are you going to know when that is? How do you know when Hamas is completely eliminated?
When you eliminate their organized fighting formations, and as I've said, we've taken 18 out of their 24 terrorist battalions out of commission. You're mopping up the remaining individual terrorists. And when you release the hostages, of course, and ensure that Hamas, that Gaza is no longer a threat to Israel. You don't have to kill every last terrorist. You didn't have to kill every last ISIS terrorist, but you made sure that that ISIS was finished as a military force. You have to dismantle Hamas as a military force that controls territory. We're well and within reach, and we shouldn't stop.
You've defined victory, and you said the war will not end until Hamas is You've directed the Israeli Defense Forces to evacuate Rafah in advance of this ground invasion. Where are those people supposed to go? This is 1.4 million people, many of whom have fled northern Gaza. I mean, they're living in tents. Where are these people supposed to go?
Well, Rafah is a very small percentage of Gaza, and I think it's about 10% or 15%.
I mean, the estimates
in that area north of Gaza that has already been cleared.
Well, there's an estimated 1.4 million people in that area right now, and as the German foreign minister said, they can't just disappear. Where are they supposed to go?
No, well, the areas that we've cleared north of Rafah are plenty of areas there, but we are working out a detailed plan to do so, and that's what we've done up to now. We're not cavalier about this. This is part of our war effort to get civilians out of harm's way. It's part of Hamas's effort to keep them in harm's way. But we've so far succeeded, and we're going to succeed again. Those who say that under no circumstances should we enter Rafah are basically saying, lose the war, keep Hamas there. And Hamas has promised to do the October 7th massacre over and over and over again.
But the Biden administration says it will be a disaster if you go into Rafah in this way, and it's not just the Biden administration, it's your allies in the region. I mean, we've heard from the Egyptian foreign minister that it would be a disastrous consequences. The UAE is warning of exasperating the catastrophe, the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza. I mean, aren't you? Is any of this giving you second thought about going in and doing this?
The answer is, John, they don't have to give me second thoughts about taking care of the civilian population, along with the provision of the necessary humanitarian aid. We've been doing it, and I've been directing it systematically. Victory is within reach. It has to be understood. And victory will be the best thing that will happen, not only for Israel, but for the Palestinians themselves. I can't see a future for the Palestinians or for peace in the Middle East if Hamas is victorious.
President here, President Biden, has been very supportive. He says there is no daylight between you and him. But this is what he said Thursday night.
I'm of the view, as you know, that the conduct of the response in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, has been over the top.
And the Washington Post is reporting this morning, talking to several senior administration officials and advisors, saying that they no longer view you as a productive partner who can be influenced even in private, that Netanyahu has angered U.S. officials on several occasions in just the past few days. I want to get your reaction when you heard those words from the president over the top, and have you spoken to him?
No, I've been speaking to him regularly, but I haven't spoken to him since he made those remarks. I don't know what he meant by that, but I can tell you where we are. Look, we were attacked in the worst attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust. That's that October 7th massacre was equivalent to 29 11s in one day, and the equivalent of 50,000 Americans slaughtered, burned, maimed, raped, beheaded. and 10,000 Americans taken hostage, including mothers and children. So what would America's response be? I'd say that it would be at least as strong as Israel's, and many Americans tell me we wouldn't flatten them. We would have turned them into dust.